Today I am reviewing Jojo Moyes, The Giver of Stars. I was a little confused. I think what redeemed the novel was the writing, because there were moments where I was like, why are we talking about this? What does this have to do with the main plot of the novel? But her writing would draw me in to the point that I was like, I don't really care. My first question was, what in the world does the title have to do with anything? And I had to look it up. And it's basically the title of a poem that she had included, according to this, at a pivotal moment in the book. I do not remember this poem. I don't quite know what that pivotal moment was. My guess is it was when Alice finally stands up to her husband and father-in-law and leaves, but I could be wrong, because one of my biggest issues, there are a couple standouts to me, one of which is that I could not quite figure out what the point of the novel was. I was just enough of a fan of hers that I would check anything out of hers from the library, so I didn't look to see what the summary was. And I actually buddy read this book with a friend, and so I'd given her this whole list. I know when I say a list, I mean a list. And I was like, here's my TBR. And she goes, well, actually, I've read The Giver of Stars. It's been a while. So if you want to read it again, yeah, let's buddy read it. And so I just kept asking her, I was like, what's the book about? And she was like, librarians. And I was like, I mean, I get that. But in my head, I kept saying, it's not really about the librarians. To backtrack some, the novel starts out with, there's actually multiple points of view, and that was another problem I had. The novel starts out with this British woman named Alice, who is kind of in trouble with her family because she does not conduct herself with the proper etiquette. It's set in the Depression era, which was another issue for me, because I didn't feel like the story had so much to do with the time and place. I thought that could have been more heavily emphasized and played a bigger role in the novel. Because yes, we had class conflict, we had gender inequality things, but I didn't feel like the time and the place, yes, because they were in Kentucky, that had a good bit more to do with the story than the time. I just kept feeling like it should have been more late 1800s than early 1900s. In any case, she does not conduct herself the way that her family approves of. She meets this American named Bennett, and she's like, he's my ticket out. He's super handsome, and we're gonna get married after a month, and here we go. So they get married. They cross the ocean back to his home state of Louisiana, and she quickly realizes things are not what she'd imagined. Starting with the fact that they don't consummate their marriage on the trip home because his father is also with them. He's not going to get jiggy with it with his dad 5 feet away. Then not only do they not have that part of their honeymoon, but they're not living in the city. They're living in a rural part of Kentucky. And they don't get to live by themselves. They're going to be living with his dad. Their home and kind of their whole lifestyle is a shrine to his recently, I can't really remember how recently, deceased mother. Alice is feeling completely stifled in this home. She is feeling ostracized by the community because various reasons, but then there's one woman in particular, Peggy, who had been Bennett's love interest. There's a lot of strife in town. At one church service, this woman stands up and she's like, look, and this is historical here. She says, Eleanor Roosevelt has started a Packhorse Library. We need librarians to ride out to the outskirts of the community and deliver books. Nobody will volunteer. She volunteers her daughter Izzy, and Alice is like, you know what? I'll do this. And everybody's like, no. You don't belong here, which means you do not deserve to be part of a library system that nobody wants to be a part of. But then this woman named Marjorie, who's kind of an outcast herself because her dad was a drunk, her family has caused a lot of trouble. She's like, I'll be part of it too. And she's like, I will take Alice under my wing and make sure that she knows what's going on. So this is the start. And this is me thinking we're setting up this traveling library, this whole idea of nobody wants to be part of this library. Nobody thinks that this library is going to be successful. So the book is going to be about these women struggling to find acceptance for literacy, banned books, for whatever can come along for a book that is based off of literacy. You know, all the troubles that can come with books, or maybe even women doing something that is maybe inappropriate in the eyes of the times. But then I quickly started to realize that's not necessarily the main plot. Getting back into the heart of the matter, it doesn't take very long for people to accept the traveling library. What Marjorie does, because they quickly realize, and oh, actually, I need to backtrack all the way to the beginning. It starts with a prologue, and for me, it was very unclear, probably because I was listening to it, which does some things get lost in translation. But it starts with a prologue of a woman delivering a book and being assaulted by a man. She is able to escape unharmed, but she doesn't know the effect that her escape had on him. He had his gun out and he was basically forcing her to get off his mule, and the implication was things were going to happen against her will. But then somebody, like the person she was delivering the book to, distracts him. So she's able to basically hit him with this book, and his gun goes off and she skedaddles. And I am assuming she is running to safety and she's going to go to this woman's home. And then we pick up with Alice filling in her backstory as to how she got where she got. My impression, as I said, it could have been clear here and I missed it, was that 2 different time periods. In actuality, it's Marjorie who had been nearly assaulted by this guy named McCullough, who was a town drunk, and his family had beef with her family, so we'll get to that later. We have this whole introduction of the library getting started, and then Marjorie realizes the demand is so high, we can't upkeep the books, we can't upkeep the library. So she enlists a black woman named Sophia, and of course, there's all the segregation going on. So that is a minor subplot in which they kind of have to keep her presence hidden because nobody's going to want to have anything to do with books that have been touched by a woman of color. Then we start to have this thing about, well, not even this thing. There is a scene in which the women are like, where is Little Women? And that's it. We move on. But kind of around the midpoint, so we've been seeing how Bennett and Alice's marriage is not going anywhere. And I'm thinking, this is going to be a big thing. Somehow they'll work through it. Good, bad, ugly, whatever. Like, we are going to get resolution. We're going to have some sort of happily ever after. And then there comes this point. So they still haven't consummated. She discovers that he kind of lies to her about where he is. She notices him hanging out with his ex-girlfriend and looking far happier than he ever is with her. The dad continues to get in the middle of their relationship. She and Bennett have an almost moment, but she's like, did we or didn't we? And she confides in Marjorie, who's like, here's the book. Basically about relations between married men and women. This gets back to his dad somehow, and the dad tries to cause a stink, which to me, I didn't understand this. We keep having meetings with him and the governor clearly does not see this traveling library as a problem, and he's more intrigued by anything by this Segsy book. And so I was like, I didn't understand that in terms of the times. I would have thought that this rich fat white man would have been as incensed as the other rich fat white man. Throughout this entire book, he never takes Van Cleve. That is I can't remember what the dad's name is for the life of me, but it's probably because it's almost midnight. He never takes Van Cleve's side. And I was like, Van Cleef is extremely influential. He owns a mine, which is another major subplot because Marjorie keeps trying to take him down for illegal practices and blah, 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 blah. This does not make sense to me. I really would have thought that because things happen later in the book because of his influence, I would have thought that his influences would have meant a lot no matter what the circumstance. In any case, their marriage is on the rocks. Bennett really feels checked out. And so that's what I'm thinking. He's having an affair. He's having an affair with Peggy, the ex-girlfriend. He's having an affair with the maid, who is really antagonistic towards Alice for who knows what reason, which is another problem that I had, where I was like, we make this huge deal out of the fact that this maid cannot stand Alice, but we never figure out why, except that maybe she's just supposed to be loyal to the Van Cleeves, and she doesn't think Alice as a British woman is worthy of Bennett's time. I really don't know. We get nothing. We get to basically the middle of the book. I was like, all right, we are here, because what happens is she finally stands up to her father-in-law. She finally stands up to Bennett, and she's like, aren't you gonna do something? And what it's instigated because, so she comes home and she, dresses in a lucky dress, only to be confronted about these two women. And she's like, who is so-and-so and so-and-so? And then the father-in-law is like, my wife's dolls. And she's like, excuse me? And he's like, you know where they are, and he said that you had them or they're gone or whatever. And she admits, she's like, I gave those two dolls that belonged to your deceased wife that you're never going to use to two children who needed them, and he cannot stand that she stands up to him. I had not realized how progressive I am until I was reading this book, which is something that Moyes does exceptionally well. Van Cleef was an amazing antagonist. I quite enjoyed the setup of the segregation between sexes, classes, races. Really well done. But he cannot stand that she is not backing down from him, because that's not what women do, especially in the South. So he beats the crap out of her, and she's like, no, not gonna put up with this. So this was something I had a little issue with, where pulls herself to her feet, walks however many miles to Marjorie's remote cabin, and lives with Marjorie for the next year-ish. We end there. And then when I picked the book up, it wasn't about Alice anymore. It was about Marjorie. And it wasn't really even about the library anymore. It was about Van Cleef's vendetta against Marjorie, because he hates the way that she is taking a stand against his illegal mining practices. He hates the way that he feels she has corrupted Alice, and he just plain doesn't like her. He's just trying to take her down, which, as I said, he's a great villain. So I didn't mind that so much, but I did mind that we sort of flipped what this story is about. It's no longer about Alice trying to rectify things in her marriage. It's not really about the library anymore. It's about their feud. Now we have her, and we have already known that she's been involved with this guy named Sven. She has sworn off marriage because of her upbringing, and she's like, okay, if you don't stop trying to get me to marry you, we're done. But that does not prevent them from having other marital relations, and eventually she gets pregnant. It was heavily hinted at. So I think we were supposed to pick up on it, but apparently Marjorie never picked up on it, because I don't know why. She was intelligent enough. She could have figured it out. We're given reasons, but it all goes into the fact that she got 6 months into her pregnancy in essentially 2 chapters. But if you really want to boil it down, it was a matter of sentences that passed the time of 6 months of pregnancy. And so that is where my problem comes in, of the fact that there are things that change in your body. There are things that stop in a woman's body when she becomes pregnant. And the fact that Marjorie couldn't put two and two together was problematic for me for how intelligent she was. So when she really, she probably figured it out, but she didn't want to acknowledge it. When she finally acknowledged it there was a massive flood in which she helped save people. And two of those people were Sophia and her brother William. William had been injured in a mining accident, and probably both because he's a colored man, as well as the fact that Van Cleve did not care about his people because he'd lost a leg, so he was kind of useless now, and he didn't have proper medical care, so he couldn't get a job. So she comes to save them, and in the process, she's like, ooh, something's not right down there. And then when she had been pushing Sven away for a number of weeks, and he says, were you ever going to tell me? Because obviously he'd had to dress her at some point, so he figured it out. What we also discover from this is that she, very observant, notices that the place that Sophia and William lived was the very poorest of poor areas of town. And it was always going to be affected by rains and flooding the most. And so she realized that the water and the residue and the smell down there was very different than other areas of town. She climbs the hill so that she has a bird's eye view of the mine, and she notices that one of, I don't remember what they called it, it's basically the retaining pool had broken. It wasn't necessarily the rain that flooded the town, it was Van Cleve's negligence. And so now she's like, I'm gonna bring you down. We have this moment that ties the prologue into the rest of the book and the end. What we learn is that winter has ended and the body of McCullough has been discovered. His head had been smashed in, and because Van Cleve has a vendetta against her, he goes to the sheriff, and the sheriff is like, oh, what's wrong? Why would I suspect Marjorie? And he's essentially bribed by French cigars, which, again, the governor won't even listen to Van Cleve, yet the town sheriff will. I'm sure he's bribed with more than that, but that's what we're given. He automatically comes to the library to accuse and or arrest Marjorie, and she's almost out of the woods when a deputy shows up, and he's like, oh, I spoke to this woman up in the hills, and this is the testimony she gave. Now, basically, it puts Marjorie at the scene, and she's arrested, given an obscene amount of bail, which nobody could pay, and she waits in jail for 6 months. No, she spent 6 weeks. Forget I said any of that. Alice is able to bribe the guard to let her come visit consistently and bring food and fresh clothes and this and that and the other. She gives birth in the jail, and she never wanted kids, but now she's in love with her child. And the trial takes place. They have been able to hire a lawyer who has been extremely ineffective, and he continues to be ineffective. And then we have this moment where Alice is shopping, and she is approached by Bennett, who says the police were never able to interview McCullough's daughters. Apparently, this tidbit of information is supposed to help clear his conscience, help them get back at his dad, who's trying to, granted, Marjorie is at fault for the death, but there's no such thing as self-defense in this case, so she can't really say she can't admit anything. So he is kind of framing her, not really framing her, because she was at fault in a sense, like manslaughter at least. The librarians are able to go up the mountain, the hill, the whatever, and talk their way into the house. There's 2 daughters, and they're like, we aren't going to talk to you at all. We want nothing to do with you, until they learn that Marjorie had a baby out of wedlock. And then all of a sudden, one of the daughters, Verna, is like, okay, I'll talk to you. So they open the door, and the women are like, oh my gosh. So of course I'm like, she's pregnant. And to me, the insinuation is that it was at her father's hand. Because the next thing we know, she is willing to testify, to perjure herself, mind you, that her father, who nobody would believe would actually be literate or want to read, be part of this traveling library, was trying to return that novel of Little Women back to the library, and he must have just slipped in the snow and hurt himself that way. And there we go, Marjorie is free, everything is okay, we're good to go. But that was an issue that I had, because it's never explained. We know that the girls hate their dad. So on that note alone, I would be willing to accept that she would perjure herself just because she wants to get back at her deceased father. But I felt like what made more sense was he had been abusing her. And so she was willing to do anything to free a woman falsely accused of his murder. An even greater issue is nobody liked him, not even his family. And then we're told how all these family members who never wanted anything to do with him gather for the trial to, cast aspersions and support him, and even the entire town, because the whole reason that people were willing to buy that Marjorie might have murdered him was because there's bad blood between her dad and him. And even though it had nothing to do with her, because of her reputation, because of her contrariness, her oddness, people were like, oh, of course, well, she's from bad stock, so we have to say that she would want to hurt this man on her dad's behalf, or because she is bad blood, or whatever. It's obvious that nobody truly believed that she could have committed the murder, but at the same time, and this is when they're writing, it's so effective. At the same time, nobody really wants to listen to sense. They just want to see something happen. And so everybody's like, oh yes, of course, Marjorie killed him. Or even those that didn't, like, nobody was willing to fight for her. And they were all just ready to watch her be sentenced. I just thought it was really strange and unsatisfying how everybody knew that there really was a slim chance that she had done this on purpose. Yet they're all standing behind him, even though he was not an upright citizen. No one liked him, not even his family members. And I was just, I just wasn't happy with that. And then we get this final chapter. All of a sudden, during Marjorie's portion of the book, Alice and Fred have fallen in love. Now, I was talking to my friend, and she was like, I always rooted for Fred. And it wasn't that I didn't root for Fred. I just felt like that came out of nowhere too, where very early in the novel, we are introduced to him because it's his barn in which they house the library. So I'm sitting here while I'm thinking of all the women that Bennett might be having an affair with. I'm like, so if Bennett and Alice don't reconcile, who is her new love interest going to be? It must be Fred. Although we're not given much about him, eventually we learn that he had been married. I might have missed this, but as far as I'm concerned, it was never explained why he's not anymore. At first I thought she died, and then I realized, oh no, I guess she left. And apparently, like, there's some dark cloud around that. Maybe she left him for another man, or I don't know. Like, there was some comment about, like, his inability to be an effective husband. So I was left in the dark about that. At first, I was like, oh my gosh, upon their first meeting, she's just going to be blown away by how handsome he is. Something that makes a massive impression on her. Nothing made a massive impression on her. And we keep seeing reappearances of him, and we learn what a good man he is, but nothing that leads me to believe that there's something going on, or that there will be something going on between them. And then all of a sudden, 3/4 of the way into the book, she's in love with him. He's in love with her, but he's too much of a gentleman, which I did appreciate this. He's too much of a gentleman to do anything because she is legally still married. So yes, then we get to the end of the book. She is ready to head home. Her family, who had said, look, once you're married, you're married. You're not coming home. We don't really care what happens. Like, you will not be welcome here. I guess she relays this situation, and her family begrudgingly is willing to take her back. So she's preparing to leave and go back to London when all the stuff with Marjorie happens. She ends up having a conversation with Fred about the fact that she and Bennett never consummated their marriage. And he's like, I mean, literally, this is like the last 2 chapters of the book or something. And he's like, well, why didn't you say anything before? That solves everything. And so he basically is able to get the marriage annulled because in the eyes of God, if the marriage isn't consummated, then it's not an actual marriage. And so he's basically, yeah, like, why didn't you tell me before? We could have solved this problem long ago. And I'm like, for the sheer fact that Van Cleve probably wouldn't have let it happen. But at some point, he does let it happen because he doesn't want his son's name besmirched. Because from what I gleaned, Fred is going to blackmail him with the knowledge that his son, not necessarily is impotent, but doesn't want to have anything to do with Alice in a marital way. And yeah, Van Cleve just doesn't want that on his son's name. And then on top of that, it's like, well, we'll also let Bennett get remarried first so that he marries Peggy. And I thought this was kind of funny, where for me, I'm like, okay, this is, I guess, what he wanted all along. And for some reason, he made a rash decision in marrying Alice and noticed the error of his ways. And so once he marries Peggy, their marriage will be what it should be. But we learn that she is stopping by the library for that banned book that caused so many issues. So I thought that was funny, but at the same time, I was dissatisfied because Bennett had no character arc whatsoever. He had moments where I thought, okay, this is the beginning. But he had no character arc. Like, yeah, he would stand up to his dad every now and again, but he never developed anything. And even marrying the girl who I guess he really wanted to be with all along, he didn't want to have relations with her. So why not? Like, what about him that he does not want to be intimate with the women he marries? Maybe it's Peggy's comeuppance for being such a mean girl this entire book, but it was really underdeveloped. Then we get this rushed explanation of, so Alice and Bennett figure out that she can get an annulment. They have their intimate moment, and then they end up getting married after Bennett gets married. Marjorie finally gives in to marrying Sven so that her daughter will have a better life, and blah blah blah. And there we go. That's the end. So as much as I enjoyed the writing, I thought that there was no clear plot. The too many characters. And that kind of goes in with too many plots where there was just so much happening that nothing was fully developed. I just didn't care for the narration. I didn't like the last minute romance between Fred and Alice. I kind of would have been satisfied with her going off back to London, even though it's not a happily ever after. Sometimes I'm okay without having a happily ever after. It's still kind of satisfying to know that sometimes things happen and it's acknowledged in a book. There were a lot of little things that I kept finding myself being like, where are we going with this story? Like, what are we trying to focus on? What is the overarching theme, the overarching plot that we're trying to resolve by the end? And I still don't know what it was, because the whole librarian thing essentially got resolved in the first half. Alice leaving her husband got solved in the first half, and then we started a new storyline essentially with Marge in the second half. Plus we started the whole murder suspect thing, which gave me heavy Where the Crawdads Sing vibes, because we had a lot about nature, and then all of a sudden, like, the backwards girl got arrested for murder. I don't know how this book did. Apparently it was the first book she published after her Me Before You series. So it could have ridden that wave to success, but then ultimately failed because people realized it wasn't as good. But as I said, it was exceptional writing. So for me, it was more about plot that was an issue. I guess I'm gonna stop talking in circles, let you say what you want to say. Do you have a favorite Jojo Moyes book? How did you feel about The Giver of Stars? And yeah, like, subscribe, comment, and I'll catch you next time. Bye.